I'm going to hand it over to Joshua Tillman, CEO of DialSource, as well as Todd Johnson. So thanks for joining us today for less prospecting, more selling. Josh, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank everybody at the audience for taking time out of their busy schedule to join us for our discussion today. I'd like to introduce Todd on the line from DialSource as well.
Morning, Josh, and again, thank you everybody for joining us. I think we have a really exciting topic today, and Josh, you and I have spent a lot of time over the last couple of months talking about this topic to a lot of really large companies, large enterprises that are struggling with this, with their sales teams. And if you go on to the first slide, some of the statistics are really interesting. How much time our salespeople are spending doing things other than selling. And, that it's a pretty stark number that our salespeople, on average, those inside salespeople are only spending 32% of their time selling and pitching prospects, and that they're spending so much time with administrative type tasks, messing with their CRM, updating fields, making sure that they close out each record after a contact, setting next steps. We know at the end of the day that this not only has a really big impact on the amount of conversations people are having, but we also know, Josh, that this has a really big impact on the attitude of our salespeople. The fact that they spend so little time in their overall day doing the things that earn them money. And I know, Josh, as you've talked to other sales executives running big sales organizations, that this is becoming one of the most important concerns that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we see on a regular basis, and even with the greatest intentions by executive and management teams to increase the output of the sales teams and make the day in the life of the rep easier, we often throw technology at the solution, and this causes an issue for the end user, the sales reps that create the lifeblood within an organization of managing web portal to web portal and technology tool to technology tool. And this adds up to the statistics that we can see on the screen that prevent our sales teams from spending their time selling. And I really believe that dials do not equal dollars, but that conversations create relationships, and relationships build and service revenue opportunities. And so we really want to find methodologies, practices, and procedures that can maximize the sales rep's time in their day to get on the right phone call, get on the right conversation, and drive a meaningful discussion about what is the root cause issue for the end user and how can we solve it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we talk about a lot is that when you look at the vendors and the CRM systems and all of the technology stack that's been built around sales, I think we've spent 20 years building better tools for sales managers, but we haven't necessarily made a big enough investment in actually making the lives of salespeople better and more effective. And that's what we're going to have an opportunity to talk about today, is a solution that can really help salespeople spend more time selling. If you look at the next slide, it's really amazing the actual cost impact that this has on organizations. I mean, this DocuRate study was very interesting. So if you look at an organization that's got 1,000 salespeople, that there's $50 million in lost revenue opportunities because of all the time wasted doing things other than selling. And across those 1,000 people, you're wasting $5 million in annual salary costs. So you can do the math. If you only have 10 people or 100 people, it's still a really, really significant amount of your manpower and your salary costs, and the lost revenue opportunity is really, really significant.
Yeah, and we've found this to be true. We have teams out right now working on, no pun intended, 1,000 user deployment, and we see that all of these processes and all of these procedures continually stack up, not only to prevent the sales and service rep from having those meaningful conversations, but also all that time and labor-intensive activity that is bogging them down. And so, to your point, we've also seen these things scale downward for the 250, the 150, even the 25-person sales team, where the issues are systemic in the same way, preventing the rep from getting on the phone and having that meaningful conversation, which is interesting because I've been here in San Francisco for the last few days on a couple conferences, and I've been meeting with Salesforce on some related projects, and this is a statistic that continues to come up in conversations, that despite all the tools and methodologies that we employ for our sales team, 92% of buyer interactions occur on a phone, on a conversation. And that is to say, I can relate to this firsthand in my own experience. If there's an issue within my family or there's an issue within a friend and they need help or vice versa, I'm generally going to call them and ask for help. I'm not going to send an email and wait back and forth or a LinkedIn message. And while those are all extremely important tools to help progress the cadence of the sales cycle and the service cycle, it's really an interesting statistic here, even in 2018. We all are still pulling our phones out of our pocket or on our desk and looking to have those meaningful conversations with the relationships that help improve our quality of life.
Yeah. This continues. I think we all think that we live in this digital world, but even the statistics about talking to executives, say the same thing. Executives are willing. 75% of surveyed executives are willing to take a call and have a conversation based on a cold call or an email, and 85% of prospects and customers are dissatisfied with that on the phone experience. So we've got a long way to go, but we have a huge opportunity here. So it's still the preferred method of communication, but then when we talk to our prospects or we talk to our customers, they're telling us, both our people that are selling and our people that are providing support, got a lot of improvement to do in terms of how prepared they are when they're on the phone, how much information that they have at their fingertips. Use that time of the prospect or use the time of the customer more wisely. And so that's what we have an opportunity to talk about today, is how do we make a difference there?
Yeah, the 75% statistic makes sense for me and in my position within the organization. I'll take those phone calls. My inbox, my LinkedIn inbox is often overflowing. It's really kind of hard to get to the importance of the message, but if somebody's got my phone number, leaves me a voicemail, or I have a conversation with them, it surfaces to the front of my mind. But really kind of this 85% number is something that is interesting and not obvious, and I think comes down to why are people so dissatisfied with their experiences here. And I think we can all relate to this, either being on the selling side or being on the buying side, that we want to interact with individuals that are informed about the product or service they're dealing with and should know us as the buyer, let's say, and really focus on that experience. But even with all this technology, this fractured environment, the CRM, the web portal for one tool, a web portal for another tool, and so on and so forth, makes it really difficult for your sales rep to get all the information in a single system of record, even with the intention of it being CRM, so they can have all the relevant information, sell to the way in which people want to be sold, and have that accurate information on their fingertips. So the questions become, how can we improve the quality of experience for our sales teams to have the relevant information, engage in a meaningful conversation, and improve both sides of the statistics?
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of getting people back to selling, it's interesting that even just leaving voicemails ends up being 15%. I think on some days, on those days where you're making lots of dials and not getting people, I think it's even more than 15% of a salesperson's time is spent just leaving voicemails. So let's start looking at how do we help people solve this problem, Josh. I think at the end of the day, what we're really focused on for the rest of the webinar is how do we help automate some of these processes so that salespeople spend more time preparing for conversations and having conversations with prospects and customers. And let's see how we can do that.
Yeah, well, if we're taking the assumption that we're going to communicate in large degree through our CRM, Salesforce, Dynamics, Zoom, whatever it may be, then if that's a system of record and we're placing these calls and having these conversations, how do we get all this data in an aggregate place, and how do we use it to drive meaningful conversations, to your point here? And I really believe in native applications. I believe that we should focus on improving the quality of experience for our sales reps to drive those meaningful conversations. And so it comes down to how can we get, let's say, our disparate systems, native in Salesforce as an example, how can we take what's being said on the phone call between the leads or the contacts and relate that to revenue opportunities and relate that to cadences, so we know how many times does it take to call somebody before we have a conversation, how long did we speak to them, how many times did we have a conversation before a revenue opportunity was created, or perhaps a revenue opportunity was closed, won here. And so it really comes down about getting all the data flowing in a real-time state throughout our native system here. And so we have this kind of oversimplified circle graph here to show what this looks like from a high overview, taking the system of record here. And so we want to use things like pre-call automation, data points within the CRM to say, have I called Todd? When did we last speak? How long did we speak? What was said in the conversation? And how does that relate to a possible open or net new revenue opportunity? And from there, we want to be able to place or receive calls with crystal clear audio. We all know how important it is to be able to be heard on the other end of the call, not have the static or pops, clicks, or dropped calls that so often is the case when integrating these systems. And then really drive those kind of KPIs that I've been discussing on how long we speak, what do we speak about, to update information in CRM across the account record, across the contact, across the opportunity, to save the labor-intensive activities that our sales and service reps should be doing, but often even with the greatest intention do not, like updating the right fields, opening the right opportunities, sending and logging emails here. These are all time intensive. And so the problem obviously becomes if I, the sales rep, don't do it, it's not reportable within the dashboards, within the reports in our CRM. So then we need to make sure that those are being updated, are being done in an autonomous way to save the rep time, and creating these predictive analytics on how long do we speak to people before products and services are closed won, for example, here.
Yeah, but so as we get ready to go into each one of these sections, Josh, I think one of the things that's really important to point out is that this is much more than just putting up a dialer. You know, this is not just trying to automate the process of dialing the phone, but it's really to make a difference for the salesperson in the long run. The real ROI is something driven through this pre-call automation, determining who to call, and then leveraging that post-call automation to make sure that we get all those correct fields updated, and that we're able to launch the next step process for each one of the prospects or customers that we've been able to contact. So
yeah, to your point, I'll say to your point, Todd, we want to be able to use those systems that we're already paying for quite a bit. Like our sales reps could be using reports in Salesforce of my contacts with an open opportunity and a task due today. We can extrapolate other data points like call attempts and duration. So we're diving beyond just the dials and looking into the analytics of what's driving those meaningful conversations.
Yeah. Well, and so let's talk about pre-call automation. I mean, this process, you know, is one of those things that people spend time on every single day, making sure that those reps are focused on calling the right people based on our experience, you know, over the last few months contacting people. So let's talk a little bit about how that process works and how we derive benefit from that.
Yeah, it's something that I say a lot in speaking engagements or even in deployments, that dials don't equal dollars, that conversations drive meaningful relationships, and those relationships drive revenue opportunity. And so we want to be able to look into that. And whether we look at our friends at Madison Square Garden, who have recently deployed this technology to dive beyond the dial, have been able to determine how many voicemails need to be left, what's the response to those voicemails, how long are conversations lasting, and across complicated product sets can drive conversations to specific products, and those outcomes then can drive more actionable and intelligent reports for their sales team to follow through with. And so to your point, the pre-call data that's being captured and the post-call data that's being logged create this cyclical loop to make sure that we're always driving actionable and intelligent questions and automation as a result.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Yeah, and I think that the duality of the control that a manager can have in terms of establishing campaigns for their salespeople, as well as some of the control that the actual rep can have in terms of creating their own call queues, is really an important combination here. And we see it within our own organization that, setting preset campaigns for our reps to call down is obviously a really important part of the process. But then for them to be able to respond quickly to someone whose marketing automation score just went sky high based on a set of interactions from earlier this morning, being able to see that rise up in the queue in real time is something that's really important. A lot of our best leads come through that process. So this whole pre-call automation is a super important part of really making this overall process work, and being able to leverage all the data, historical data, to make better decisions about when to call people, what time to focus on people that are in the financial services business on the East Coast versus other industries on the West Coast. It's really, really valuable. And the trends are pretty strong in terms of when you start to use these analytics and focus your calling on the right people at the right time, your connect rates go much, much higher.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it goes more beyond just the dial, how many dials are being done, to figure out pickup times as it relates to roles and industry segments, which could all be data points contained within the CRM. So adding this data back into Salesforce or to our system of record here empowers our management teams to make faster, more accurate decisions, and from that data continue this iterative process instead of just smile and dial and hit a minimum amount of dials for that day. And so speaking of that, about that dial, we want all kinds of data coming from that dial back into the CRM, like when was the call initiated and how long did it last, and what percentage of the conversation was on the rep side and what percentage of the conversation was on the lead or contact side. So we're looking at, are there effective dialogues going between our sales team and our leads and contacts, or are we seeing monologues from our sales teams over pitching the recipient lead or contact? And these become not only data points for us to make more actionable and intelligent decisions, they also become training opportunities for onboarding of new sales reps, so we get them more productive faster with less time and resources here.
Yeah, the fact that we built our own carrier stack, I think, is really important. And one of the major differentiators that we see in the marketplace today as we talk to prospects is the number of solutions like this that have been built on an interface to Twilio. I would say today that over half of our pipeline is made up of people that are intend to leave a solution that's leveraging Twilio to find a much better telephony solution. And so this is a real point of differentiation for us. Not only are we able to gather data because we own that telephony stack that you can't when you integrate with Twilio, but just the call quality and the ability to record calls in full stereo. This ends up being one of the attribute in a solution that's happening in the market today. I think this is something people look past during that early sales process. But it doesn't take reps long to start getting really annoyed with the lack of call quality that comes out of these integrations with API-driven telephony stacks.
Yeah, and we can all relate to that, whether we've been on a GoToMeeting or a WebEx or whatever we're on, and there's latency in the audio or there's poor quality, and how frustrating that can be. We definitely do not want to create an experience like that for our sales team, nor our leads or contacts. And to your point, without overdwelling on it, our organization spent over a decade designing our own carrier network before we started putting together this type of enterprise-level communication solution across CRM.
Yeah.
So we kind of get to the other side of the loop here on the post-call automation, and so you kind of invert eventually with some data. Pre-call becomes post-call, and vice versa, because we're updating those things, incrementing call counters, incrementing voicemail counters, incrementing stages of opportunities as it relates to our selling process. And we want to continually have this iterative feedback loop to make sure that we are taking those labor-intensive activities that are required at the end of a productive or even a non-productive call and getting them logged into CRM in real time and walking the rep through, asking the right questions at the right time so we can save the rep time and energy, increase the amount of conversations that they're going to have in a day, and of course, simplify their quality of life in the organization, which is going to allow them to focus on driving more meaningful revenue here.
Yeah, Josh, yesterday you and I spoke to a sales leader from a financial services institution, and when we started talking about post-call automation, one of the points that we made is that when you use the DialSource solution, it kind of forces that rep to actually set the next step. So to close the loop, to determine what the next step is 100% of the time, because that's how you terminate the call. And that gives you the ability to go do reporting now on those outcomes that is a full sample size. And you could see the aha in his face when he started to recognize that the only time today that he's actually reporting on are the few times, that less than 50% of the cases, where his salespeople actually set a next step. So you're essentially deriving 100% of your insight from about 40% of the data. You don't have to be a math specialist to know that that's just not statistically the right way to approach the problem. So again, another one of those things that is very much underrated in terms of people understanding the value of the data that you're generating, that you're storing within your CRM. We got to get these salespeople to 100% compliance on setting the next step. So it's just another one of the things that the system does that makes it easier for the rep and delivers fantastic value in terms of this ongoing process improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that being said, I want to hop over into a simple dev org of Salesforce where we can just show in a few minutes time what this entire talk track and what these loops look like for a day in the life of a sales rep here. So bear with me a quick second here. I just want to make sure that you guys can see my screen here. We've got our friend Bruce Grant of Hulk at the Avengers as a lead record here. I'm sorry, contact record in Salesforce. Todd, do you see that?
Yep, we're good.
Great.
I'll make another quick point, Josh. So this solution, the DialSource solution, is available on Salesforce Enterprise, and then it's also available on Dynamics. And as Josh mentioned early on, the application is actually written fully native in Salesforce. So you actually only log on to Salesforce to access DialSource. It's a managed package that gets installed against your Salesforce instance. And similarly for Dynamics. So it works very much the same way in both environments and is fully native in both cases.
Yeah, absolutely, which allows flexibility for support of custom objects and custom fields. So we're automating and updating the relevant fields to the stage of conversation, not only for our business, but also the different products or services within that business here. And we're going to point to some of those custom fields here. And I've mentioned logged into Salesforce here to show just a very brief demo of this in function. And if I want to be able to click a call here, I can click on any phone number inside of the CRM. DialSource immediately places the call to the record here. I'm connected and having a conversation. As we can see, there's no information on this brand new contact here. And so I can interact with fields that are specific to a business model. Like many of us can relate to perhaps seats within a SaaS-based solution or widgets within our business. And so I can add some information in here, which will be used in the CRM to automate and calculate opportunity dollars, stages, etc. Now we'll notice on the right-hand side, I have these blue dispositions. These are completely customizable in name of the disposition, grouping of the disposition, and the subsequent automation that will be sequenced and logged at the end of the conversation. So that is to say, if we're following up from a conference in San Francisco, from attendees at the booth or the keynote, I could have specific name dispositions that only update relevant fields, build custom emails, attach relevant information, and update and log those activities in Salesforce, as opposed to perhaps an inbound phone call from a known contact with an open opportunity. These dispositions could completely change by name, group, and automation. So I, as the rep, am always being presented the right outcomes for the stage of the conversation. So in this case, if Bruce and the Avengers are interested in DialSource, I'll have to take in some basic notes. I'll just say DS webinar. Click save. That will disconnect my conversation with Bruce here, and DialSource now has done a half a dozen things for me in real time in this simple example, like updating a couple fields, logging some notes, and creating a follow-up task here. And so just as I can show here, we can see that DialSource put in date and time of the call, the outcome of the call, the duration of the call. It logged an activity here for me, which I'll go ahead and bring up here. And not only is it logging that activity, but it's pumping in all kinds of data related to what happened here, not only creating the task, but also that the fact it was an outbound click to call as opposed to a report or campaign driven outbound or inbound call, date and time of call placed, start and stop time, which allows really deep analytics around session times, and even greater things for us to dive down into. And so
Josh,
yes.
Let me stop right there. So a couple of really important things have happened here. One is that all these fields got updated automatically based on the disposition that you chose, and so that saves the rep a lot of time and make sure that we accurately capture all this information every time based on the disposition that's chosen. But the other thing that you talked about that's really important is the fact that those dispositions were tied to that activity. It was tied to calling someone that came from a list for a webinar or from a keynote that you gave in San Francisco. The other thing that this lets us do is makes it a lot easier for salespeople to work in a single day against multiple campaigns. And DialSource makes sure that that salesperson knows what campaign that lead was associated with and delivers to them the right dispositions for that campaign. And this makes a really big difference because you see that context switching for a salesperson is really difficult. And a lot of times they end up spending a lot of time trying to group all of their different calls because that context switching can be really difficult when you're trying to make 100 dials in a day. So DialSource, again, delivering a lot of value to the salesperson and ensuring that they close the loop effectively and complete all those follow-up activities.
That's right. And not only that, but we're also going to enforce the right kind of compliance. So when I want to follow up with this contact, even though I just did it, DialSource is going to say, we realized you placed a call. Are you sure you want to do that? Making sure we're prompting the rep to interact and make the right decisions. But should have that been a do not call record with the flag in Salesforce, DialSource would have changed the green box to a red box and prevented the rep from violating the compliance in real time here. So this becomes obviously a very large and important thing for organizations looking to drive the right productive behavior, but also to prevent the wrong behavior here. And if we were to advance this, right?
That was a subtle point right there. You know, what Josh had done is he just placed that call to Bruce, and then when he went to call it again, it knows that the system knows that most cases you're just making a mistake. You didn't intend to call Bruce back so quickly, so it asked you again whether you really wanted to call Bruce back. And, you know, as we talk to big companies that, you know, do a lot of outbound calling, there's a lot of concern around compliance. And we'll talk more about that later, but, you know, one of the key things about compliance is not only making sure that people, you know, stick to that do not call flag and that they're not able to make a phone call for a record that's flagged with do not call, but also to prevent people from making silly mistakes that upset the people we're calling. I mean, that's how you ultimately end up, you know, with issues around the do not call list is you make people mad.
Yeah, right. So let's enforce the right behavior. And speaking of which, perhaps at the end of the subsequent conversation, I need to create a revenue opportunity, and I need to update the stage and the dollar amount and make sure that all those activities are logged. And that could be 3 different screens in Salesforce, an account, a contact, and an opportunity, and perhaps a dozen fields across those records. And so we want to make sure the rep is updating and logging everything accurately each and every time. And so again, DialSource can make sure that that occurs here. And you'll notice that I have a create opportunity disposition here. And in choosing this, it can make sure everything is done automatically here. And again, I'll just say perhaps moving into pilot. Disposition the record, the call has ended, and now all this automation has really been updated here. And so as the rep, I could decide who do I need to call next, perhaps take that inbound phone call. And yet again, just by updating and refreshing my screen, we'll quickly point out that the date time was updated, the last call outcome was create an opportunity. We can actually see in the activity history that the activity was logged with my notes, and there's our new revenue opportunity set with the stage of negotiation review, the right dollar amount, and the estimated close date here. And while we're not only logging these activities, we're taking the historical information along, so we know that Bruce is the contact that we spoke to at the account related to the revenue opportunity, and that the historical tasks, when perhaps it was a lead or perhaps when they called us in for more information, is being related back into this revenue opportunity. And so when thinking back to that circle graph through the presentation, this is kind of a simple yet high overview of what it looks like placing calls, updating the right fields, opening and closing revenue opportunities in an automated way. So we're focusing on me, the sales rep, having the conversation with Bruce and working on the relationship and understanding the requirements, but then having the technology, Salesforce and DialSource, automate the right activities, saving me time and also making sure everything is logged.
You know, one thing that we should talk about real quick, Josh, is compliance. You know, we know, again, especially with our work around HR-related activities, payroll companies, financial services companies, that compliance is and privacy are, you know, their top 2 most important attributes of any solution that they're going to select. And I think because our solution is native to the CRM, having people understand that we never take any of that private information out of the CRM system, and that all of those EIN numbers, social security numbers, credit card numbers, etc., always stay within the CRM, I think is a really important point, and it's a huge differentiator for native applications like ours versus, you know, things like your InsideSales.com or your Outreach.io, things that are actual integrations where they actually suck information out of the CRM and hold it within their own application and then sync it back. It's a totally different level of concern for companies relative to clients, because you actually take control over really important key information, private information, into your own application.
Yeah, absolutely. And there could be lots of technical discussions, but simply speaking, you kind of hit the nail on the head there that as a native application, we don't want to see the client data. We don't want to know about the client data. We want to only push in the relevant telephony data, the durations, into the CRM so management can make these intelligent and accurate decisions of who to call, when to call, what's happening on these related conversations, as opposed to the integrations needing to pull all the sensitive information out of Salesforce or the system of record, see it in a web portal, interact with it, and then really push it back. And then that is not only going to cause a potential concern around the data, but also it takes time. It takes time for those integrations to do A, then do B, then do C. And that adds to that fractured environment that makes it so difficult for the sales and service teams to act quickly and accurately.
Very good.
I thought perhaps we'd close out here with some examples of some dashboards that will help to quantify how we can use this circle chart that we've discussed to drive accurate data and decisions within Salesforce. And so we just happen to have a couple dashboard screenshots from our friends at Stanford who have been using the technology. And if we look at the right-hand side of the graph, just focusing on the month of things, here in the top right, we can see how many actions and activities are being updated and logged in total across a single sales team. But below, we start to break out and say how many conversations did each rep have in this 30-day window, and how many associated minutes of talk time did they have. And so we can start correlating conversations of contacts with open opportunities and how long we're speaking to them through the delta of the blue and the green, and see perhaps high efficiency in the top where lots of conversations are occurring that have high talk time, or perhaps in that middle where there's lots of conversations but not very much talk time. And again, as we kind of discussed, we want to go deeper into the data than just the dials or the conversations, and so we do so in the subsequent graph of how much time a day was spent in an active conversation related to a contact and an open revenue opportunity with a discussion over 3 minutes in length. And so we can really kind of dive in on why that's important and how that's important. And then I'd say lastly, before we kind of open it up, is as we saw here where the dispositions in DialSource and Salesforce can open revenue opportunities, adjust the stages of those opportunities, you can really drive in to say who's producing the most amount of net new revenue daily, weekly, and monthly in the top right graph, and then dive even one layer or further and how many net new dollars is each rep generating every time they have an active conversation here. And even though these are example metrics, it goes back to that constant iteration to say, what new intelligent questions can we ask looking at this data, and how can we save our reps time in a meaningful way through this automation?
Yeah, very good. Hey, Jason, can we see if anybody has any questions?
Yeah. So as you have questions, pop them in the GoToWebinar side panel here. We have one here from Rick asking if DialSource can integrate with Zoho. Josh, will go and let you answer that one.
At this current time, we cannot. It is roadmapped to bring DialSource into additional CRMs. It's a different kind of ballgame doing an integration than a native application. So short answer, no, not today. More detailed answered in the near future.
Right. Here's another good question, Josh. The question is, how long does it take to implement DialSource in an average opportunity?
It's shockingly quick, and it goes back to that native application. We can get our team to install the managed package in under 10 minutes. Really, the labor-intensive aspect comes down to sitting with your sales leadership team and understanding what are these pre- and post-call automation data points. What would you like to be updated at the end of each outbound and inbound call, and either create those fields in the CRM or just tie new data to be pumped into it. And so we're doing deployments in either days or weeks on the long end for the very large deployments.
And Josh, yeah, I was a customer of yours at a previous company and position, and I know one of the biggest things I was impressed with you guys with was that professional services piece that you were talking about. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks. And that's something that has kind of been a requirement for us as a growing organization as we've done thousands of these deployments over the last decade or so across large and different industry segments, for profit, not profit, EDU, financial. We've learned a lot of things to make these suggestions. Perhaps there's a better way to look at the data, perhaps there's a different way to manage that data, or perhaps there's intelligent things between the data that are not obvious. And that's really where our teams can come in and say, we want to sit down and understand this to kind of push you in the right direction, to facilitate asking the right questions, all the way to the other side of the spectrum where we've had to do large-scale deployments, top to bottom of Salesforce, entire ecosystems, and then bring DialSource in. So it's very important to us as an organization that we're aligning with our clients to help them ask the right questions and then take meaningful action quickly.
So Josh, one more, probably use this as our last question. In our Salesforce org, we're running out of fields. How many fields does DialSource require?
It's a great question. That becomes a more relevant question across bigger organizations, and as you're starting to add more applications and integrations into your CRM. The short answer is we take one field, and we can take only one field instead of the typical 10, 15, or 20 fields as a result of being a top-to-bottom native application. And in more complicated deployments, we can do things like relate the fields from other integrations back natively into Salesforce. And this helps simplify these deployments and decrease the time.
We have another question from a user. This one's pretty funny. So Adam's asking, he recently heard about an application called Cirrus Insight that can help in the automation with Salesforce. Do you have any experience or reviews of that product, or are there others which are similar? So Adam, I actually used to be the VP of marketing and was the first hire at Cirrus Insight. So obviously a lot of familiarity there. And one of the great things with Cirrus is how well it works in tandem with something like DialSource. So instead of having your reps having to switch in and out of their inbox as they get people replying to emails, it allows them to be able to log stuff to Salesforce right from the inbox. And so those are going to be the two primary ways that your reps are talking to and interacting with customers, is in the inbox and on the phone. And so those are a pair made in heaven. And so, yeah, those are great solutions to use in tandem with each other.
And for what it's worth, we use Cirrus inside of DialSource. We're using Gmail for our sales and service teams, and we're using DialSource for all the inbound, outbound calls.
All right. I have one more. Josh, can you talk real quick about the ability of the real-time priority queue? Because as a marketer, this is one of my favorite pieces of being able to pass stuff immediately to the right rep at the right time as we get those signals from marketing that it needs to be passed to sales.
Yeah, and it really comes down to, again, being a native application in Salesforce or Microsoft. So should a webinar attendee decide that they want to take a test run of DialSource, as an example, if they fill out information on our website, that updates a field in real time in our Salesforce org. DialSource grabs that field in real time and finds the first BDR or AE available with the right skills, profile, and role in our Salesforce org to place the outbound phone call within a second or two to that inbound web inquiry. And so this allows us to interact with those leads and contacts that are consuming our material. You can take that up a notch and say, for example, if I send an email out through Cirrus Insight and somebody looks at it, same type of process, and I'm calling somebody as they're consuming that material. We use this in conjunction with the App Exchange. We use this in terms of if I'm on stage at a keynote and live chat is on our website, starting to get real hot, that's then going to grab all those records that are coming in through web chat, through web leads, through the Salesforce App Exchange, and auto-disseminate them to the right records. So we're not waiting 5, 10, 15 minutes, or in many cases, a whole day to reach out to the right people. And it's customizable and changeable. So as we start to look at more actionable and intelligent decision-making processes, we again further iterate as we show in those circle graphs.
Yeah, by far one of my favorite stories from one of our own internal reps was when somebody scheduled a demo on the website, and they called them immediately. They got a room full of the C-suite who was still on the website looking at and evaluating the product, and their reaction was, how in the world did you do that quickly? We want this for our sales team, so we can do the same thing with the same type of speed.
Absolutely.
Great. One last chance for anybody to put in any questions for us. Otherwise, we will give you guys an extra 10 minutes with your day. Well, Josh, Todd, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Like I said, we will send a follow-up email with links to the recording as well as the webinar deck. You can also reply directly to that email if you have any questions or you want to schedule a demo with us where we can go into more specific use cases and what that would look like for your work. Thanks, everybody.